Sound speeds, and welcome to episode 5 of this new podcast format. Now, I am still looking for a name. If you have any name suggestions, please put them in the comments below. But let's waste no more time and get right into our content. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I don't really trust frequency response curve graphs, and there's a reason for it. First of all, if they are accurate at all, it is based off of a prototype or the gospel mic that was created that all the other ones were modeled off of. And there is tolerance that the companies will manufacture a microphone to. So if a microphone prototype was designed to be a certain sound and they got it the way they wanted it to sound, and they did a measurement of that and they used that to create a frequency response graph, if they do that at all. Some microphones, they just kind of fabricate something. But if they do an actual measurement to it, and it sounds a certain way, when it goes to the manufacturing process to take that microphone and mass produce it, there's going to be tolerances allowable, plus or minus 2 dB, for example. So if the whole entire microphone is perfectly flat, let's say, it could be like this a little bit. It could drop down to -1 and sit there the entire time, drop down to -2, and then go up to +2 and still be perfectly within the area of tolerance, the allowable tolerance that the manufacturer allows. It could be plus or minus 3. And many microphone manufacturers don't tell you in the specification sheet exactly what their tolerance is. Some microphone manufacturers may have a tolerance of over plus or minus 3, in which case you could deviate by as much as 6 decibels between one microphone and another microphone and still be within the tolerance, because one microphone could have the entire thing be flat at negative 3 dB, and then another one could be at positive 3 dB. Or it could be that one starts up here at -3 and then they swap in the other side. If you have two microphones that are technically matched and you compare them, you could say they sound very different because they're maybe not close in serial number and they weren't produced at relatively the same amount of time. Because that's one of the factors that they keep in mind also. Most of the time when you buy a balanced pair, it is simply 2 microphones that came out of the assembly line at more or less the same time. Because if the humidity is a certain way inside of the microphone manufacturing company, if the tension on the diaphragm and everything, basically the components and where they source them and the way that they build the microphone with the electronics are going to be more or less the same if they are produced at more or less at the same time. And capsules sometimes are produced one-on-one. Sometimes they're produced on a big sheet and then cut down to size. So it may be that based on their expertise and how they go about picking similar capsules and the way the microphone actually would be designed, it may be that you want to try to get 2 capsules that are off of the same sheet that they were all cut from. So it could be that. But here's the thing. When you are measuring microphones, you are not measuring it at the distance most of the time that they're going to be used at. Many manufacturers measure a microphone at a distance of 1 meter away, 39 inches. Whoever uses a large diaphragm microphone or even a small diaphragm microphone at 39 inches away, 1 meter away? You don't do that very often. And therefore, when you bring it closer, what happens? Bass goes up. You start to increase sibilance. You start to increase the poppiness and the crinkleness, and the detail basically comes up when you bring a microphone closer. But if the microphone itself is measured and the frequency impulse responses are a certain distance at 39 inches, they're recorded at a certain amount, and then you bring it closer, they're going to be out of whack and askew. So 2 microphones that have an almost identical frequency response could sound very different, and most likely will sound very different by the time they get close to your mouth. Therefore, you can't trust them. Earthworks and some companies will produce a secondary chart that shows what it's like. Like Earthworks may measure it at a distance of 1 foot away, which is going to be closer. It's still not going to be 9 inches, 6 inches, or 3 inches, but it's going to be closer to where it's usable. And some manufacturers in like the UK, for example, Thomann, when they release their T-Bone series, they have which is their house brand, which are fairly discount microphones, but they'll measure at a distance of 1 meter away and then at 1/10 of a meter away, so about 4 inches. That's going to give you a better representation of the way it's going to sound. So people that look at a frequency response graph and say, oh yeah, this is a very flat microphone. Well, if you use it from a meter away, sure. But if you use it from very close, you can't claim it's a flat microphone. That proximity effect is going to go through the roof. So when it comes down to it, frequency response graphs cannot be trusted unless you are using it at a distance that it was measured at. So, I mean, when you're even looking at a way, for example, to measure them, you have to have different factors that you consider. For example, let's say you manage to find yourself a measurement microphone that is exactly perfectly flat. You need to also find a coaxial test speaker, a coaxial, not just a regular speaker, because there is a difference in the distance that sticks out and on different speakers between the woofer and the tweeters and the mid-range speakers and whatever else. A coaxial test speaker will more align them onto the same kind of plane. They will be better. And so if you take a measurement microphone a distance away from a coaxial test speaker, it will pick up all the frequencies at more or less the same time, and therefore you're going to get the best possible result. It's not going to be mistimed where they're slightly off. You may say that's not much of a difference. Well, here's the thing. Sound waves are different sizes based on the frequency it's reproducing. Here's a way to look at that. Sound frequencies that you pick up in your ear are vibrations. And it ranges, our human ears can hear between about 20 and 20,000 hertz per second. So if you're thinking about this, hertz are basically the number of vibrations that happen in that particular frequency per second, right? That means the number of vibrations acoustic vibrations that pass a given place at a time. If 20 vibrations pass a certain point per second, then what you need to do is say, if it's 20 waves that pass a place in a given second based on that frequency, then you know that the wave will go through a crest and then through a trough 20 times in a second. How fast does sound travel? At 343 meters per second, or about 1,225 feet per second, more or less. Depending on the temperature, and there's other factors too. But if it is going at that distance and it is going across at a certain speed, no, that's not right. 1,225. That's not right at all. My brain is suddenly fizzled on the. Maybe that is it. My brain just totally fizzled on that number. I'll put it up on the screen right here. This is the exact speed of sound at, let's say, regular, like what they consider to be like 12 Celsius or about 100, it's about 68 degrees. That's the frequency right there. Or that's the, how many meters per second. Suddenly my brain fizzled on that. It might be 1225. My brain just totally fizzled on this. But here's my point. A certain frequency is able to vibrate a certain amount of times per second. And however many times it passes a given point in a second is what the frequency is going to be based on how many times it cycles. So if it's 343 meters per second and you have a 343 hertz sound, that would be what? That would mean what? It means 343 of a certain size wave can pass this place in a given second. If it is 343 meters per second is able to pass a given point, and that signal happens to be 343 hertz, that means that each one of those is 1 meter. Does that make sense? So if you're trying to do the math on this, that's one of the ways you can do it. But here's the point where I'm going with this, is that sound waves, in order for it to properly pick up from a coaxial test speaker into a microphone, there's going to be reflections around your room and your environment when you're testing. And you have to make sure those are far enough away to dissipate properly, because if it's too close, like every time you double your distance away from a source, it drops about 6 decibels. But if you are trying to measure down accurately to 20 hertz, you need to take one entire wave to get to the outside bits of your space and then come back in. So you need to make sure that microphone is a good distance away from everything else around it. Otherwise, the reflections can come back in and affect the sound. Now, you can do a virtual anechoic chamber where you basically go in and you have the computer cycle out and reject out any of those reflections it's able to detect. But in an ideal world, you would want to have a microphone floating in the middle of a space that is extremely big. We're talking like the room would be maybe over 120 feet high and wide, and you'd have the microphone floating up on a stand about halfway up. That would be to make sure it's able to record down to about 20 hertz properly. And the reason why is because a 20 hertz sound wave is about 56 feet long. It's 17.15 meters long. So there you go. But when you're talking about measuring a microphone, and when you're talking about the speaker pickup and the microphone, the way it picks up, speakers, like a microphone, is able to reproduce sounds not perfectly, but pretty accurately according to its own tolerance as it was made. So just like a microphone may be able to pick up plus or minus 2 decibels, a speaker will output at plus or minus a couple decibels also. And if that speaker happens to be a little bit more bassy or a little bit less bassy and more mid-range or trebly, and a microphone is perfectly flat, it may think that microphone isn't perfectly flat. It may think that the microphone is more closer matching the speaker frequency response. So there's a lot of factors to consider. There's a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes down to measuring microphones. You have to get over the tolerances. You have to plan accordingly and try to remove the outliers, try to remove those things that are not exactly accurate, like the imperfections in the frequency response of a coaxial test speaker and the measurement microphone you're using, things like that. But if you are trying to do your own measurements, there could be a lot of things that go off, even in the way that you calibrate your equipment and how you would use whatever program you're using to measure. The long and the short of it is, there's reasons why I don't trust frequency response curves, even by the ones that the measurement microphones and the 2 coaxial test speakers of the manufacturers that supposedly you can trust when they measure their own microphones. You may say, this doesn't seem accurate. This doesn't seem right to me. Well, there's no standard for how microphone manufacturers have to measure their specs. They could do more or less smoothing. They could do it in a different type environment. They could do it virtually or non-virtually, or they could just make things up. It just depends on how the company chooses to do it. So you have to keep this in mind when you're looking at microphone specs, because you should. It is very important for you to hear the microphone, for you to get a judgment, because everything matters, from the microphone to the way it was measured to the way it sounds on your voice and where you're going to be using it. One question people love to ask YouTube content creators is, what is your signal flow? What are you doing differently this year than the last time you did a video about your signal flow? Well, not much. Now here's what I'll tell you about the system that I have here. You can watch my video on my new Studio version 3. And the system is basically the exact same way. There is one minor difference. Actually, I won't say minor difference. I'll say there's one difference to the way it happens to be. I'm still using my Sound Devices MixPre 6, but I no longer record my audio directly on that and then import the audio into my computer. I am going straight out of the MixPre 6 into the computer and recording in Open Broadcast Software, OBS, with the microphone input straight from the MixPre 6, going directly into my computer with my camera on, which is it's a Razer Kaio Pro Ultra. That's what this camera is. If I am recording directly just my voice, I will do that. If I do any kind of other microphones, if I have a large diaphragm, if I have anything else, I will take that and plug that in as a separate input. Or if I do a reaction video and I have to have the audio from the computer as well, I will record on the MixPre 6 because I need to process that audio differently than I would do my own voice. And by processing, I don't mean EQing. What I mean is removing background noise and normalizing things like that, and leveling out things. So that's one of the reasons I would use the MixPre 6. My signal flow is still going into the computer, but now I'm not recording on the MixPre 6. I'm recording directly on the computer most of the time. Now, I will still record on the MixPre 6 again if there's multiple sources, but as a rule, I record on the computer. Now, coming into the MixPre 6, the signal flow is still the same. It's still going straight out of my DBX286S, which you may say, that's not necessarily clean enough for you to go into a MixPre 6. You're going to have a higher noise floor. Okay, I bypass everything though, and I just use this as a preamplifier. And then I go over there. And you know what? I process out the background noise anyway, and it's clean enough for that. So in this environment, it's not going to be a big issue. Now, going into the DBX286S is a microphone. I was, until very recently, using, and I'm going to go ahead and say it because it's been a long time. You guys know I have been using a microphone, and I've referred to it in the past as a microphone that doesn't exist. And that is because it happens to be a Deity Unimic, one of their prototypes. This is one of the, I think, 5 prototypes that they sent out or produced in general, and they wanted to get feedback and thoughts about. And I had it up here inside of the Deity shock mount, and it would sit up there and it would be angled back at my mouth, and it sounded really good. And then my friend Sean Milo, who you'll recognize from the Epic Live Stream 2022, happened to give me an Earthworks Ethos. So that has been what's been connected up at my studio for the past, for about a month and a half, something like that. Since I started this podcast, I believe. It's been on my desk. I think that was about the time I started this. It came in about that time. Before then, it wasn't something I used, but the Ethos has definitely been part of what I use now. Now, I might at some point remove this. Probably remove the windscreen altogether. Oh, great. Now the microphone just spun up. Okay. So what I need to do is lock it better. Why did it lock? Oh, it's because people have been using this. Oh man, I just totally jacked this thing all up. Great. Brilliant. Good job, Alan. Okay. Let me tighten everything. All right. That's tight. That's tight. Yeah. That's not going anywhere now. So that, get out of the frame. There you go. That would be the way it sounds, the Earthworks Ethos without this. Oh, this is actually a pretty dense windscreen. It would be used for plosives though. I should speak into it. Man, there's actually a lot of, what is that? There's an extra piece of foam up in there. So I've never actually taken this apart before. I'm going to have to do this now. If I put this straight on there, it'll still go on there. It'll probably be a little lighter, but with this on the inside, which is the way it's supposed to be, you put this in there, you press it all the way in until it goes to the end. Oops. There you go. Now it's in there nicely. Now it fits over the end. Now it should sound a little more muffled. I don't know. I kind of like the additional detail of not having it on there at all, because that is one thing. This is another thing altogether. It sounds better detail, which it's supposed to. Is that? Yeah, that's square in there. That's nice and flat. Okay. So I might just run with it this way and not even use that at all. But, oh, get out of the frame. There we go. But my friend Sean Milo gave me the Earthworks Ethos. I was actually visiting him at his house, and we were listening and testing the difference between the DPA 4017B and the 2017. And then he said, I really want you to hear the Earthworks Ethos and the SV33. So we did a blind test. We recorded all 4 microphones at the same time as I was talking. And then he produced, I said, don't tell me what they are. I want to tell you what my thoughts are. And between the 2 DPAs, the 4017B is still my favorite microphone. I like the sound of it better. And then I compared the Ethos to the SV33, and the SV33 is more detailed, but it's kind of like a Neumann microphone in the sense that it doesn't do me any favors. And I don't sound as good on it as I do the Ethos, I think. So the Ethos, I said, I like it. And he says, well, here. He happened to have like 5 of them. And he says, here, take one. So I brought it here and connected it up, replaced the Deity Unimic, which honestly, I really hope Deity releases this at some point. This is a surprisingly good microphone. It really is. And I tell you, for to work at your desk in something, like the way I've been using it the past couple of years, this is a surprisingly good microphone. It's very sensitive, so you might want to end up buying yourself, like what I did here, an external windscreen on it, because it comes with a fat, big one, or at least the prototype did. But I tell you, this is a surprisingly good microphone. And I really hope Deity releases this at some point, especially if they're able to do it at a price point between like $200 and $300. It'd be great at someone's desk to get out of the frame like this. Like the Ethos is doing a great job, but the Ethos is also about $200 more, $150, $200 more, something like that. Maybe even more than that than what Deity would sell it for. So there you go. That is my signal flow. Currently, it is the Earthworks Ethos without the windscreen going through my Heil PL2T arm with, I think I'm actually still using the WBC, the world's best cables, as they call them, which are basically Mogami cables, but on a third the price. And basically because when I did my new studio video, I didn't want to have to make cables, stuck what I was doing. I wanted to get the system up and going. And I bought them and I said, I'll just use them temporarily. They've done great. So, I mean, it's basically Mogami quality. So might as well continue to use it until it no longer works, right? And then from there, it goes down the arm into my DBX286S, where I am currently bypassing all processing and I'm just using the preamp, and then going into the Mix Pre 6, and then going out of that to record on OBS on my computer. So there you go, my 2024 signal flow. So there you have it, episode 5 of this new podcast. I appreciate you watching. And again, if you have any, not questions, well, I mean, if you have a question, sure, feel free to ask that too. Normally, if you send it in the comments, I'll go ahead and just answer it. Email me, alan@soundspeeds.us, if you'd like to submit a question that you would like me to address in an upcoming episode of this podcast. And there's only going to be a few of them that I'm going to guarantee will be produced. Right now, we're halfway through our test. But if you have a question you'd like to ask me for it, then by all means, please write me an email and let me know what that question is. Aside from that, I appreciate you watching and listening, and I will see you in the next episode of this. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.